Hi, I'm Deb Yorkman, and on behalf of SDI and Fairmarkit, welcome to today's discussion on addressing tailspend through people, process, and technology. With me today is Erin McFarlane and John Delligatti. Fairmarkit enables organizations to purchase the goods and services that they need using data and automation. They promote market competition to drive impactful results. Erin McFarlane here is the VP of Services at Fairmarkit. She's a procurement and software systems leader specializing in digital supply chain transformations using machine learning and AI. She has a passion for sourcing, contract negotiations, and spend analytics, and has an infectious enthusiasm for her work. SDI is the digital supply chain solutions company with a focused practice in tailspend, MRO, and PPE. Celebrating 50 years in supply chain, SDI is different than a traditional BPO. The company manages tailspend and MRO as a service and provides a unique perspective as one of the largest transactors of tailspend globally. And Click Luminary and one of the winners of 2021 MDM Future Leaders Award, John Delligatti, is SDI's Director of Digital Supply Chain Transformation. He drives innovation and improvement through data literacy, automation, digital product development. He uses his passion, creativity, and experience to solve both conventional and complex business problems. Thanks for being here, John and Erin.
Thanks for the great intro. Happy to be here.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love being infectious in a good way.
Yes, yes, I know. I should have reconsidered infectious, because of the pandemic.
I'll be
It's on point. It's on point.
Well, and it feels good for me to be on a call with someone else described that way. So I think this is going to be a good conversation.
We're in for a great conversation. So just to kind of level set here, for many companies, getting a grip on tailspend, that 20% or so of the budget that spreads across 80% of your vendors, has long been regarded as just not worth the effort, too overwhelming, too little reward. And after all, tailspend is unsexy, usually consists of routine, commoditized consumables and other maintenance, repair, and operations supplies. So improving tailspend requires management resources that previously companies were unwilling or unable to spare, right? But today, tailspend management is getting a second look from many manufacturing companies, multi-site facilities management organizations, and even private equity firms with these types of organizations in their portfolio. Why? Well, because the pandemic was really an inflection point, and it served as a catalyst for organizations to really rethink the way they manage their supply chain. We saw that all over the place. And it's still about extracting value, but also about ensuring business continuity, right? So the optimal management of tailspend can both cut costs, yes, but then make operations run more smoothly. So Erin, can you talk about Fairmarkit's experience throughout the pandemic and any key lessons learned? How are people, managing this before?
So before, I think you hit the nail right on the head. People would just ignore it. They would draw a line in the sand wherever they decided to draw it, whether it was spend below 100,000, spend below 50,000, spend below 250,000, and those thresholds of where they would have procurement and sourcing, doing sourcing events and actively managing things, and they'd set those numbers kind of arbitrarily based on the amount of resources that they were able to dedicate, and then everything else below that just kind of wherever it went, and companies were able to function that way, often just buying from the same supplier over and over again for these routine goods, and they just kind of get ignored. But when the pandemic happened, all of a sudden, the disruption wasn't just with your strategic suppliers. The disruption echoed all the way down the tail, and things that were small purchases, just because something's a small dollar purchase doesn't mean it's not really important to your operations.
Right.
One of our clients is in transport, and they had to take a bunch of trains and trolleys off of rotation because they didn't have headlights. So the headlight manufacturer had been shut down due to COVID. And at a minute's notice, you have to find a backup supplier for some of these things that are really important. Even though they're small dollar, those small items and small services can bring your manufacturing line, your service line, your operations to a stop if you don't have them. And so I think a lot of large companies, especially in manufacturing, recognized a need for change during the pandemic. And other companies really fundamentally had to change who they were and what they were doing and the work that they were operating on. And that required an enormous amount of agility from the procurement and sourcing organizations that you can't do with people. You can't go from 100 sourcing events a year to 10,000 sourcing events a year just by hiring people. It's not going to happen.
And we saw that a lot with PPE too. John, what did you see? Like, in what ways did the pandemic show us? That these different segments of tailspend need to be addressed differently.
Sure. Well, I mean, a couple of things that Erin said. I mean, she nailed it. Of course. So a few comments there. As building out the analytics and automations, you get the benefit of not just, if you look at analytics on your previous history, but if you're automating things, it tells you things about your processes, and you can identify if you already were somewhat along your digital journey and have some level of analytics, you could tell at a moment's notice across the organization, hey, my supplier's out of gloves, but there's a different business unit that also buys those same gloves, and they happen to be buying it from another supplier. So if you have that ability to sort of look at your supply base with a strategic view, you were able to solve some of those issues. And I'm not saying there weren't issues, but you would already know who your secondary or your tertiary suppliers were before you ever had a problem. You'd be able to search through your analytics platform and understand where else I can buy this. So, to Erin's point, even those tailspend suppliers became critical when it was a small dollar item and you're out of headlights or you're out of PPE, whatever the case may be. I mean, everyone remembers what happened with the masks, and now it's not masks, but it's always going to be something, right? So if you had the ability to understand across your supply base, hey, yes, this is tailspend. These are the categories of the tailspend that I'm buying from these suppliers. It helps you slice and dice that. And while other people are still trying to figure out where else they can get it, I've already gotten it somewhere else. They're already a vendor. I already have terms. You're way ahead of the game. So that really helps you, when you need to go out there and source some stuff from your tail while not having the capacity, like Erin said, to run 1,000 sourcing events. There's some middle ground there where you give yourself that tactical advantage.
Yeah, I mean, the whole idea of going from 100 sourcing events a year to thousands of them is kind of daunting. So procurement professionals are definitely, if there's a way to kind of segment the tail and address each section, like how should they go about segmenting it? Is there a formula? I mean, obviously it's going to be different by what's critical.
A formula, we always like to try and oversimplify these things, but something that we've always done, and Fairmarkit helps us with as well, is the categorization, right? I mean, when you categorize your data, and we use some pretty cool stuff, we use some AI to help us with that as well, and it helps you segment that, at the point when you take in the data. So if you have items that are set up for stock or things you buy repetitively, you can codify that, and you'll know the next time it comes up. When you're going with like those text requisitions, the things that Fairmarkit helps us get quotes on, right? It helps us to categorize that because, okay, we got the quote this time, but now we have that data. Now the next time that comes up, we can recognize, oh, that's part of this category. If we need to buy it again, we can take a look at all the items that were entered as a text requisition and fit in the PPE category, since it's, hot topic right now, right? So now we can see all of these recs that were going out of the process that are actually safety. You look in your data, you pull out the safety stuff, and bam, to Erin's point, it may be more sourcing events, but it's a targeted one, and we don't have to run 50, right? We have a category we can try and source now, right?
So does that help them identify, kind of categorize what's critical and what's not so that they can prioritize those sourcing events?
Yeah. That's a good way to start. So analytics and data is the heart of it all. And I think a lot of companies realized over the last year and a half that the data they had wasn't as good as they thought it was. That it is garbage in, garbage out. And if you have individual people typing in office supplies for back office, that doesn't help you out a whole lot when it comes time to replenish that back office and to find secondary suppliers and identify things. So I think a lot of organizations realized that they need to start upstream. They need to really get a handle on what is the stuff that they buy and get more cooperation. So the good news is I think procurement's been yelling about this problem for years and yelling into the void, right? But now everyone understands on a fundamental level just how important this is to your company's operations. So it's gone from this is something you yell about that everybody's like, yeah, procurement, whatever, to oh yeah, that really hurt us in the last year and a half. That really made our lives hard. How can we not end up in that position again? How can we make sure that we're more resilient? And the answer often is, how do we get to the source of the data and make sure that our analytics have the information we need?
Well, yeah, I mean that's what it sounds like. You and John are both talking about the data, and the data is key to address each segment. So, like in your experience, John, do most organizations have this kind of data, or what's it look like when you
So
get
they
it
have
typically?
something. See, they have something to go off of, and the key is any improvement is an improvement, right? If you don't do anything, you will be stuck in the trap you're in today. And this is true for everybody. You know, you could be relatively mature in your data organization and still make strides by employing new models, new automations, right there. So it doesn't matter where you are along the journey, but it should not be something that's so daunting you just don't do it, because then you're going to get left in the dust. And it's actually interesting in the MRO space. You know, we go out and hunt for partners, and there are tremendous companies worth billions of dollars that just don't want to do it. You know, we'll reach out and we ask to connect with them via APIs, host catalogs, and things like that. And some of them just say it's not part of their business model. It's not even like a matter of terms, right? And I'm sitting here, and you know, I don't want to sound like I'm bringing in the doom and gloom because of the robots, but it's like, come on, guys, like, you know, you need to get with the times. Have you seen what's been happening? So you know, the thing about the source data, just taking it back to you know your question, it comes in all sorts of ways. So one of the ways I got involved with the data here at SDI was I would take RFQs that were for, you know, sales processes and run them through analytics. So instead of going and getting quotes on 10,000 items that maybe you win the bid, but very likely are just being used to negotiate with an incumbent, we don't have to do that anymore. Now we take in your data, we say, hey, here's how we think we can help you, and we have the data to prove it. And as part of that process, I will ingest their data and see all sorts of things, from descriptions, just like you described, Erin, for back office. If we're even that lucky, I've gotten things with blank descriptions, and they ask me how to fix their inventory, and I say
for 2021 through 2024.
exactly, and guarantee you're going to save me 15%. But you know what's funny about it is we can guarantee, and whatever percent you want. But part of the reason I feel confident in guaranteeing that when I see that data, it's not because I can prove it with the data. It's because if your data looks like that, I can save you whatever percent we negotiate, because we will make such remarkable improvements to your data quality that these sourcing events we're talking about will be possible. Right now, you can't run one.
Just having the visibility.
Blanket POs, and you're at the mercy of your vendors. So it really pushes transformative change in the organization.
I mean,
it's amazing.
Go ahead, Erin.
It's amazing what just simply having visibility will do. Simply having visibility to be able to go to one of your suppliers, one of your key suppliers, and we run an arbitrage report that basically says for the same item, you have paid these 17 different prices. You go and you present that report to your sales rep, and your sales rep goes, oh, we'll fix that and we'll issue you a credit. And we've had people simply by running that report, by having the visibility, just having the data is transformative.
So I promise we haven't talked about this, Erin, but Deb would know because she's been on a couple calls with me. I make that report. I make it a line chart.
Benchmarking report.
I make it a line chart over time, and I show that. I say, so who do you have a contract as part of the sales process? You know, so you mentioned you have contracts with some. So who do you have a contract with? Oh, we have a contract with XYZ, one of the big names you'd expect them to have a contract with. And then you say, okay, well, I found this part number. And so in that contract, are you supposed to have your pricing look like a heart monitor? It's you know what? If it was just up, you could at least say they're taking a step increase. I'm talking, you know, and we're making all sorts of shapes with our fingers. I'm Italian.
You guys are hilarious.
You know, and you know, but it's true. And some of them are so extreme that they can only be unit of measure issues. So then I'm saying, okay, well, did you truly buy 1,000 boxes of earplugs or 1,000 earplugs? You know, I think I know the answer, but your data doesn't tell me. I'm assuming at that point. You know, so that is when I do these walkthroughs, it's one of those that gives you the oh wow moment, you know, because that's something the person you have in the room, they're not always a data person, but if they're a data person, you got them hook, line, and sinker. If they're not a data person, they're sitting there from I manage the contracts level. So that directly contradicts what they believe is going on. And, we work to help each other. It's not adversarial, but it's one of the things that helps show themselves in a new light. They haven't seen that before. And it can really get you the oh wow moment.
I mean that's a good point. There's definitely, it's not just having a magic box and the data goes in and then it tells you what to do. There's this human element to it where it's expertise in supply chain and procurement process that you guys bring to the table. It sounds like, John, you get to workshop with the client, the organizations directly on this. Can you talk a little bit about how the data helps you tell a story and how you drill down onto like what's really going to make an impact for each specific organization?
Sure. And that's what's interesting about this. You mentioned for private equity firms at the top too. Just wanted to note that this also helps, across multiple. If you're a PE firm that owns multiple organizations, you can think about it that way as well. They're just multiple business units. So if you have these analytics properly piped in and these processes properly piped in, it can help you understand this at the macro level, for multiple businesses as well. But the way the analytics helps us drill down, whether it's, a business within a PE firm or say a category within a company, things like that, is it really enables it to be an interactive experience. I mean, to be fair, this is what we use to manage their spend. So this isn't just a, nice glitter and making it look nice. This is what we give to the procurement managers to help develop wave plans, to manage the spend, to drive those year-over-year savings, to run sourcing events.
Okay.
So we're giving them a peek behind the curtain, but the reason that it's powerful is because we walk them through our process and the questions that we have, whether they're as simple as, hey, you don't have any descriptions, or a little bit more in depth as, hey, this top line says you have 1,000 vendors. Based on the amount of spend you have, I would expect you to have less. When we look at your vendors, it actually looks like they're entered in multiple different ways because your data quality is a bit lower. So this isn't actually a true metric. Hey, are you sending POs to multiple versions of this vendor? Are you getting your rebates? Right? Because if you think about it, if you have a transactional service agreement or a rebate and you're cutting POs to 6 different companies, it's probably only being captured in one way. Erin's nodding along over here. I'm sure she's seen this before, right? So we walk them through these processes, and sometimes they show it. Oh, it's just the data set. But sometimes it's like an oh wow, they'll realize yeah. So it's sort of, to your point about interfacing with the clients, it's just helpful because they call it data storytelling, and that's what you're doing. You're telling the story of their company to them with their data. So it's a very interesting experience.
It's very powerful, I bet.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
For sure. Mm-hmm. I mean, so obviously there's a lot of people analysis that goes on here. It's not just a robot telling them what to do, but there's technology that does enable this, right? What other types of technology, Erin, can really help with this?
So at Fairmarkit, we've been investing a lot in machine learning. So machine learning allows us to not only teach a data set and create algorithms at the outset, but to continually learn and create feedback loops for that information. So with us, we're talking about quoting, requests for quote, requests for proposals. And we want to use the data from previous RFQs to influence future ones, and from ongoing purchasing to manage this. So often when you get into a technology program, there's sort of an implementation period and then you're all done. But the way that software as a service and machine learning have to work together is to basically have that continuous improvement of the data models and continuous learning about your tail spend, about your purchases, about your seasonality. Because what the reality is in procurement is it's not a straight line. What you purchased 2 years ago is not necessarily what you're going to purchase 2 years from now at all. So simply looking historically isn't enough. So machine learning is big. And we've been doing a lot of work in robotic process automation. So if you have people who are clicking a button here, copying and pasting a thing here, and then hitting submit, and they do that exact same motion every single time, that's prime to automate. Like, that's the work. Nobody wants to do it anyway. So it's not like the robots are going to take away your favorite job. They're going to take away the boring stuff that you didn't want to do anyway. So what we're trying to do is automate the boring stuff. So the combination of machine learning and robotic process automation is really what gets us to AI. I went to an AI convention right before the pandemic happened, and I saw this slide that cracked me up, and it said, So AI is written in PowerPoint, machine learning is written in Python. Um, and AI has been this buzzword for a long time, but where we're really getting to it is by using technologies like RPA, machine learning, deep learning, and even blockchain. So using those technologies to drive repeatable, predictable outcomes.
That's awesome.
You nailed it. I mean, sorry to steamroll you there, Deb, but
Go ahead.
yeah, no, I mean, I help run our RPA program, and we have citizen developers. So I don't know if you've deployed something like that over at Fairmarkit, but that's really cool because we have developers, just like they're more business minded than SDI, but they're still more or less IT folks. But then the citizen developers, which is essentially when you empower your ground level users to use robots, right? You don't need to be an IT person. You could be in sourcing, you could be in finance, whatever the case may be. And we give you the ability to create robots. That's how we really drive the efficiency in those back office processes, like you're saying, Erin, because listen, you can automate things at scale. I got news for you. IT's been able to automate many things for a long time. Yeah. The difference now is it's been democratized. We talk about the democratization of data. This is the democratization of coding. You're introducing, they call them no code. Erin, if you have experience, it's low code. It's not no code. I call it low code. That's what I call it. So, you take your tech savvy business users and you give them the ability to take that, instead of writing macros in Excel, now you can do this with the internet. You can do this with SAP. You can do this with other platforms. And now work is fun. I mean, for me, that's fun. I like that. To your point, not only do you, Erin, you get rid of the boring tasks so you can do things that are more strategic, but the action of automating the boring task is kind of cool. You're learning, and you mentioned, I think it was infectious enthusiasm. That's what I try to spread into our RPA program, because if we get the ground level users to do that, they're turning over the rocks of the processes that we'll never know. Right. The organization-wide stuff, RPA helps, but if it was a big enough deal, it would have, in the past, it would make it to your app development team. It would make it to your VP of tech services.
But this is like ground level stuff in the weeds. You wouldn't know about it.
You wouldn't know about it. The time to develop it is so much shorter. And then your ROI, if you think about it, you don't have to measure it on, I saved hundreds of people all this time. If you deploy it to 10 people and each person cuts 25% out of their workday because of this, even that's not a lot to aim at. You could do a couple processes and you'll get that ROI. You know what I mean?
So small wins, but
small wins stack up because they're repetitive. If you need to prepare a report to do your job every day, and instead of doing it, you push play and make breakfast or whatever the case may be, you're saving yourself a lot of time. And it's not just that, it's the quality of life. Your job is not inundated with those boring tasks anymore. So I think that's
a report that came out recently that said that they did a survey where if you could automate these, mundane, for lack of a better word, tasks in your job, what would you do with the extra time? And like 75%, 80% of people would use that time for professional development. It's like, get better at my job. Like who doesn't want that? Right. So, if Erin, you were talking about how if it's a click and there's like yes, no decision making and that's it. It's a great candidate for automating. And that makes sense for stock purchases, things that people purchase regularly. But what about non-stock? Is that a good candidate for automation?
Well, that's what we do. So yes, absolutely. But it requires good data and it requires an agile way of thinking. So one of the things that we do here at Fairmarkit is we roll out incrementally. So rather than trying to come up with all the requirements for an automation project up front, we're starting with watching people do it manually. Okay. And sometimes when you ask people how they do something and then you actually watch them do it, there's a big difference between the two things. So what we're doing is whenever we roll out an automation program, we roll it out in 2-week sprints. So we incrementally improve things. Okay, we're going to focus on these 3 processes. These are the 3 processes we're going to automate. So maybe we start with stock because stock is well defined and really clear, and it is nice, clear yes, no's. Great. So let's try stock in this really clear way. All right, what's the next less complicated thing? Is it special orders? Is it things that are only stocked sometimes? Or do we just want to dive on in and do nonstop? And that's where you have to use additional technologies like natural language processing and semantic search versus elastic search. Gets really exciting. Gets really thrilling. But it's also where you flip over the rocks, like John was talking about. When you get outside of process, that's when you learn about, well, most of the time it works like this, but about 30% of the time it doesn't, except in these circumstances and in this way. But you learn those things as you go along, and you often discover processes that have never been mapped, have never been well understood, and somebody else in the room stops and says, wait, roll me through that again. You do what? And why?
Yes.
Well,
And
because
it's the why, asking the why.
that there was some sort of an audit requirement, and we've been doing it ever since, and no one knows why. You know?
Yes.
So you get to unwind all those things, and it starts out sounding like you're doing a technology project, but whenever you're doing automation, most of the work that you end up doing is unwinding broken processes that have been broken and duct taped and bubble gummed and broken and duct taped and bubble gummed for so long, that when you finally unwind them, there's this organizational sigh of relief.
Yes.
It doesn't need to be that complicated.
Yeah. At SDI, we call them the world's best mousetraps. So, it's a similar analogy. I liked that game when I was a kid. But the other thing that you mentioned that I thought was interesting too is with the processes. Thinking forward, we're looking into those process mining technologies, which are pretty interesting, where you deploy them on your server, and then you're right, it's a people play. But you don't know what they don't know, right? So if you can deploy something that understands that, these are technologies that sit on your systems and it watches them. So I know you get into some Big Brother territory, right?
Helps you match the process then?
Yeah, so it's basically a technology that you can deploy, and it will watch what the people do. And it will tell you, hey, you processed 2,000 invoices and 1,100 went through clean and 350 got held up at this stage and 400 got held up at this stage and 3 went this way. So that's a real outlier, and that gives you, to Erin's point, that this is the whole process, not just the desired process. When you do these types of things and, tying it back to Tailspend, you can, all of these purchases that are made, if you can incorporate this technology so they can understand why are you purchasing this, at what interval, how are you going through making that purchase, how are you searching for the item to purchase, whatever the case may be. These are all questions that might seem hard to grasp, conversationally, but if you just have an automation that sits there and tells you, here's exactly why everything happens, or here's a map of what happens. Let's figure out why it happens. Let's put it that way.
I mean, it sounds like the process mapping alone is worth the initiative.
Exactly.
Right?
So that's one of the takeaways. And then look, if it's something you decide that's too complicated to automate, or some of the outliers you want to leave as outliers, to be handled by a human,
it's not like you wasted
gives you
time.
the data to support that.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting looking forward.
Yeah, and that's why that incremental change is so important. You don't want to boil the ocean.
No,
you're never going to be able to automate 100% of something, but that's not the goal. If you can automate half of it, that's amazing.
Setting that expectation is important, though. It's true, because I'm totally on your side, but I can't tell you how many times I've gone into a meeting and that 10% exception seems to blow it up. Guys, can't I just give you a report with the exceptions and we don't process them? Like let's get this moving. If we can handle so much of it in an automated fashion, to your point, we don't have to boil the ocean. Let's take that step. It's a big step.
Well, it sounds like what both of you were talking about is really like change management 101. Like with any kind of organization, automating a process is going to be a change. Like, Erin, what challenges do you typically face in implementing solutions like this? Like, how do you overcome those challenges to drive user adoption?
I think the first thing is that people have a
rollout.
Yeah. So people have a fear that the robot's going to take their job away. And overwhelmingly, that's not what companies are looking to do. They're not trying to take jobs away or eliminate roles. What we're trying to do is free up your time on boring stuff so you can work on more strategic thought stuff, things that require your brain and require your creativity. And so the first step, I think, is for executives to make it very clear that when you're rolling out a new program, we're not trying to automate your job away. That is so not the goal right now. We have more work and less people. We're trying to give you tools to do that and to make your job better. So that's first. And the next is to involve the end users as much as possible in the incremental change. So while executive sponsorship is hugely important, the earlier you can get users with their hands on the keyboards, influencing the design, influencing how things are going to work, the better. Because like John said, everyone at the top level, they have a vision of a process as it's supposed to be, but the people who actually do the job know how the process actually works, and there's frequently a really big disconnect between the two. And so the earlier you can identify those things, the better it works for everyone. You actually get the automation that you're looking for, and the people whose jobs are most impacted are in control of that change. I
That
don't
control
buy.
is key to
Yeah,
user adoption, isn't
that's
it?
a big deal. The fact that you're
Yeah.
involving them, they're a part of the change. And they also, to your point, Erin, we're also we make a point of in our messaging, we're doing this to scale. We need to scale. We have limited resources and the company is growing. We want to give you more time to think strategically. It's the same exact thing. And if you involve them in the process, number one, they're learning how it works. So they're gaining that skill professionally. And then number two, they can see it's not going to take their job. It's taking a sliver of the annoying stuff that they do. It's not doing their job, and the fact that they're involved in that process, if you don't involve them, there's a real fear, although you and I know it's not going to happen, that one day IT is going to install some program and they're going to say, hey, don't worry about it. We don't need you anymore. And that's just not how it works. If they could see what we're developing, they're involved in the process, they'll understand the program and the intent is truly to allow them to think more strategically and use their time in a good way. It helps everybody who grows professionally from copying and pasting things, right?
Well, I mean, a lot of technology has been adopted since the pandemic. Just even the fact that we're doing this interview via video as opposed to live. I mean, have you seen a shift in the end user behavior since the pandemic? Has it made it easier
Yeah, absolutely. I
in terms of
think
acceptance?
as a whole, there was this joke that I saw, which was who led the digital transformation at your company? A, CEO, B, CIO, C, COVID-19. So
Exactly.
everyone realized that writing a requisition on a piece of paper and just sending emails back and forth is not sustainable. And working remote, I think, forced us to be better at sharing information in a central place, right? It can't just all live in your personal email or be something that you're making a phone call about. So yes, I think people are much more understand the need for storing information in a central location and being able to collaborate in technology, not just collaborate in the workspace.
Yeah, and that's why it's a great point, because what I was going to say is with the COVID-19 kind of pushing the gas on the change there.
Mhm.
Going even back to the tailspend, that having when you mentioned the kind of the tribal knowledge of walking around the office and watching somebody do something, it doesn't exist anymore. So having the democratized data to go in and research, I've bought this before, here's where I've bought it. You can't go poke your friend on the shoulder who works at a different account anymore, or who was there when you were off. If you want to look up your history, you need to be able to go look up your history. If you want to be better and communicate better, you need to adopt these technology platforms if you're not going to be there in person. If you don't do that, how are you possibly going to, communicate better? So, a lot of people, it was definitely an inflection point. A lot of people say, COVID changed it. I kind of like, it pushed the gas on the pedal through the floor. These things were going to happen, but they were on everybody's forecast to happen in 5 years. If you look at the internal deck, our CEO shares with us, he had some things marked for MRO 2025, and there's X's through like 3/4 of them because, they happened in a year and a half, and now we're like, well, what do we do for 2025? So it's a really exciting time, but, those things were on the radar. They were just 5 years away, you know what I mean? Or 3 years away, or whatever the case would have been. And COVID just said, nope, let's go, and I think that's important, because the point is these forces were at work anyway. You know what I'm saying? These things were going to happen. It's just who knew it would happen like this, right?
Well, so in terms of procurement and supply chain maturity, where do organizations that you typically work with sit? I mean, is automating or even just addressing the tail spend something that even organizations with low maturity can undergo?
So yes, both, and I'll
Okay.
let you answer next. So we have a mix of organizations, some that are extremely mature from a procurement perspective, and they're using this as an opportunity to push the envelope,
Right.
to take it even further, to really become a market leader in the space, and to use their supply chain as a differentiator. So we have some very advanced organizations that are using their supply chain to further agendas like supplier diversity and sustainability,
Right.
to tell stories that about where we are as an organization are sourcing our stuff that we sell to you. So those organizations exist that are pushing the boundaries of what you can do. But there's also a lot of organizations that are using this as a chance to leapfrog. We have a couple of companies that during the last year have gone from purchase requisitions that were literally written on 3-ply carbon paper. Pink copy, yellow
Carbon
copy, white copy.
paper.
Still selling that?
All right. Like you give the pink copy to AP, you give the white copy to purchasing, and you keep the last copy for yourself. Like, so they're going from that to fully digitized.
Wow.
So we've kind of got a split. We've got a lot of customers that are taking this and saying, hey, this has been on our to-do list for years, but now it's not a nice to have. It's
No, it's a need to
critical.
have. Yeah.
We're not in the office anymore, and I can't hand my piece of paper to accounting. It doesn't work. So that it's gone from being something that we really should get around to it to, all right, well, if we're going to change, we might as well change all the way.
Yeah, and you mentioned how you can push the envelope on the top end, to further it on the lower end of the maturity scale. Even if you have those paper recs today, just putting this business process through digitization, even if you don't have the data, you'll get the data, So even if you start with absolutely nothing today and you just say, we're going to begin by processing all of our stuff through a new system and utilize certain fields consistently, or utilize Fairmarkit's platform to fill in, these data points, things like that, right? You will gain that data. So even if that just seems so I don't even have any data to start, how can I do it? Well, you implement the process, the automation records what it does, and that becomes your data. So it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy where, if you don't even have good enough data to have the analytics, well, if you get started, once you get started, you will inform the analytics, develop the strategic plan, and then all of a sudden you see that velocity of maturity spike up because you're going to really start seeing those returns once you start getting that data coming to the system.
Does it work if you, like earlier you talked about private equity, and what if they're all on different systems? How does that work?
It doesn't
All the
really.
data.
Yeah, I mean, so that's part of the expertise, companies like us would bring to the table. We would take all those disparate reports, we would normalize them. We have tools to recognize, hey, this field is this field that we think, and we do the best we can. But it's an iterative process, like Erin mentioned, and we'd work with them. Hey, does this look right to you? No, this doesn't include tax. As an example, we need to make a new column and whatever. This company has these rules. This company has these rules. We can do that. We just need, we've talked about processes, we've talked about mapping. We just need to understand that. So if we know what's coming in, then, we can take it from garbage in and transform it at the very least. If it's total garbage, right, you're limited in your options. But
Right.
If it's something like I mentioned, if it's a PE firm and they're both using a big name vendor, but company one has it spelled differently than company two, that's the kind of stuff that as we inform our models, they'll figure it out. Maybe our first iteration, it'll think it's 12 suppliers. Then the second iteration, we'll have a rule in there to recognize, nope, that's actually all one supplier. And here's your actual spend profile with that supplier. And it could be so much different than you thought it was, right? And now all of a sudden you make the decision, hey, these guys are in the catbird seat to be a preferred supplier, or what are we doing? We're not supposed to be using them. Our preferred supplier is these guys. And then we can shift the data. So
yeah, I mean, that's like to your point and Erin's point, that helps the supply chain become a value creation lever. Whereas before it was just an enabler of operations, and now you can take a look at that data and see where can we get more value from what we're doing. That's awesome. So what kinds of outcomes, like overall, can organizations expect to see if they start managing their tail spend more strategically?
Okay, so there's a couple of things that they can expect to gain from this supply chain process here. So number one, you could leverage your spend with those aforementioned preferred suppliers, right? Everyone across the organization speaks the language of savings. Even if they didn't care about MRO in the past or tailspend in the past, they do care about the
Everybody
dollar,
wants to save money.
right? So that's number one. No matter where you are in the curve, you can, go ahead and accelerate that savings by bucketing your spend, in a better way. If you're to the point where AI would help you, you could route those non-stock transactions into your preferred supply base based on some rules. And then supply chain continuity has to be one, it's top of mind with everything going on with COVID. So once you have this data, as we mentioned before, you have your secondary suppliers identified, you perhaps even have that automated in a way where you, submit a purchase order gets rejected, move on to number two. You can have all that stuff pre-built. So, you have a higher level of supply chain continuity there and knowledge across the organization because you can democratize that data out there. So those would be my top two there.
Yeah, so I would echo that. The first two are going to be very clearly cost and risk. That you are reducing cost, you are reducing risk.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of other benefits that come out of having visibility. Today's consumers care more than they did in the past about where the goods and services they're buying are sourced from. It matters to today's consumers that the companies they're buying from are purchasing in an ethical way, purchasing in a sustainable way. And we're seeing this really great partnership emerge at some of our companies, thanks to having the visibility, right? Because you have to have the visibility first.
You have to have the data. Yep.
These really cool relationships between supply chain and marketing that I've never seen before, where you can do storytelling and say, so we sell clothing and we want to introduce you. This is where we get our cloth. And this is the small business that was grown and that the community that was impacted by the fact that we're purchasing from this cloth manufacturer.
Exactly.
And those stories are very memorable and they matter to today's consumers, both business and B2C. So once you have visibility, you can start to do more than just manage cost and risk. You can also start to focus on the end product. That is what you're buying high quality? Is it sourced effectively? And that's the interesting work that people in procurement want to be doing. Like, that's the stuff that makes you feel good about your job and makes you stay where you are and be engaged. So if you automate the junk stuff, if you make it so you're not just reworking POs all day and dealing with invoice match exceptions, and instead you're forging relationships with your suppliers and having those people conversations, that's where fulfillment happens. And I think that's where I see procurement able to go.
That's a great point. I mean, especially because you're by addressing this tailspend in particular, you're enabling the procurement organization to do more. Any typical procurement organization is lucky if they get 80% of the company's spend under contract, right? Maybe.
Oh, yeah.
This helps with the visibility aspect into those categories and allows for closer management to uncover savings, but also to do those strategic initiatives. But that remaining 20% is harder to get visibility into. So getting more spend under contract gives them more access to the spend so it can be addressed and managed and create value, beyond just to really achieve the organization's goals, including those, corporate social responsibility goals. That's awesome. Well, I want to be cognizant of your time here. I want to thank Erin and John for this insightful discussion on how procurement professionals can start to address tailspend, whether they're mid-market industrial manufacturers, retailers, private equity firms even. If there are any further questions, viewers can connect with Erin and John on LinkedIn or reach out to me directly at debra.yorkman@sdi.com, and I'll be happy to put you in touch. Thanks, Erin and John, so much.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
This is really great. Thank you.